I have ADHD and a form of autism called Asperger's. That's the same type that Elon Musk has. And not having the words or understandings for that concept in childhood meant that I sort of struggled to fit in.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia. And for those people watching us from around the world, Prince George is in beautiful province of British Columbia, Canada, and it's about 800 kilometers or 500 miles north of Vancouver. And it is physically in the center of British Columbia, an absolute beautiful, beautiful province, beautiful country here. Not much snow this year, amazingly, but we still get some, I'm sure, before the winter is over. Today we have a very special guest, actually, and her name is Sandy Smith. And the first thing that I saw about your bio is that I help man experience rapid evolution, which is something that we're going to be talking about, and about a very interesting bio and a past that you have. So with that, maybe Sandy, tell us a bit about who you are. The other part that I should share with our guest, you just got married last week. Congratulations.
I did. Thank you very much.
So tell us a bit about you.
Well, I am a life strategist, I call myself, and I've had a journey in my life with a lot of different areas of interest. I have ADHD and a form of autism called Asperger's. That's the same type that Elon Musk has. And not having the words or understandings for that concept in childhood meant that I sort of struggled to fit in. And I spent most of my time alone just observing humans. My special interest since I was 4 years old is human behavior. I guess I was sort of intrinsically incentivized to use my fortunately gifted mind to study people. And nowadays, I've had lots of different careers. I've been an entrepreneur for about 17 years, but I tend to primarily work with men. And a lot of the men I work with are high performers, PhDs, CEOs, entrepreneurs, millionaires, and a lot of them end up being neurodivergent or having ADHD. And naturally, over a couple of years, I just kept getting referrals for more and more men. And it struck me that no matter what they had achieved or accomplished, a lot of them had a very similar sort of challenge or struggles or trouble sort of bridging the gap between achievement and fulfillment. And it just sort of was a really natural, exciting fit for me to step into, which I understand it's a little bit unusual for a woman to coach men on masculinity, but it's been working really well.
So then, where are you located now? Just to get that part under.
So I just moved to North Carolina.
Okay.
I previously lived in Alberta in Canada, so not too far. I'm very familiar with BC, but I moved down here to the US to be with my fiance, now husband.
Wow. And so were you born then in Canada or in Calgary?
I was born in Toronto and then raised just outside Toronto in Guelph, Ontario. But I have lived in Alberta for 23 years. I went out to the mountains, and the day I got there, I just thought, I'm never going back. I'll never leave. So.
Isn't that beautiful? You know, so, and North Carolina, which area do you live there and which city?
Outside of Raleigh, in between Cary and Apex. So it's just beautiful here. There's like tall, gorgeous trees everywhere. Everything is green and lush. It's January, and we were wearing t-shirts today.
I know.
So no more 8 months of winter. It's beautiful. No. Everyone's really friendly. And the house we bought is on this big quartz vein. So there's like all these gorgeous stones just like spilling out of our yard. It's amazing. I love it.
Yeah. So it's also a beautiful area. There's a very active forest industry as well, as you indicated from the trees. Quite a few of the companies. I'm also involved in the forest industry and own a number of lumber mills. So,
Oh, wow.
so Asperger, what is that? Some people would ask.
So nowadays, a lot of the language has changed around neurodivergence, or as we call it, on the spectrum. So it's more helpful to look at, I guess, what that looks like for different people. And like I said, in childhood, when I was a child, they didn't have words for those sort of things yet. So I was labeled as intellectually gifted. I was doing university level work at, I think in like grade 3, 4. And yet I had certain things that I was really terrible at, like really terrible at. So they didn't really know where to place me. And also because neurodivergence often looks very different in women, nowadays the label would probably just be somewhere on the spectrum. But ADD, ADHD combined type, and Asperger's is formerly on the autism spectrum called high functioning autism, which basically could mean a lot of different things. And I would like to acknowledge that everybody's experience with neurodivergence is valid and totally unique, because we are also very unique human beings. But it's sort of a way of thinking, and often it comes along with very spiky skills. So areas of massive genius and areas of sort of deficit, not dissimilar to ADD or ADHD. Where some of the struggles come in with Asperger's is sensory, which again is very similar and often now co-diagnosed with ADD, ADHD. So sometimes there's some sensory differences, and sometimes it can cause social struggles, or what might have been called social deficits, or we sometimes have to learn things that might come naturally to most kids. I wasn't really interested in the things that most kids were interested in. I was always interested in consciousness and human behavior and very adult things. I didn't really relate naturally very well. That was something I sort of learned over time, was to socially assimilate to my peers. And it is quite often a crossover on that neurodivergent spectrum between ADD, ADHD, and what is formerly called Asperger's, but that term itself is a little bit out of fashion nowadays.
So how do they call it now?
Now they would just call, in the DSM-5, they would call anything on that neurodivergent spectrum neurodivergence or on the spectrum.
Yeah. And so, like for me, I was born in 1940 in northeastern Holland, just at the beginning of the Second World War, and I don't know if you're familiar with Holland, but relatively small. Northeastern Holland is in the extreme northeastern point. It was about 10 minutes from the German border, and we were invaded by the German army in April of 1940. My mom had already 2 kids, a sister 1 year older than me, brother 2 years older. I was born November the 1st, 1940. So my dad was drafted into the Dutch army in April of 1940 when, and the last time they heard from him, he was seen was before the bombing of Rotterdam. And a lot of Rotterdam was destroyed. It's a very major city in Holland, as you may know, and thousands of people died. And so for the next number of years, during the 5 years of war, my mom then I was born, then she was pregnant with me. In the beginning, I never knew my dad. because of he didn't come back until after the war, and so things were very, very difficult, very tough, and I remember still the things from when I was 3.5, 4 years old. Was hundreds of bombers in the air. The sound is still with me. I can, it's an unbelievable sound to see 300 bombers in the air bombing Germany for day and nighttime bombing from 1943 until 1945. And then with my mom, what we used to do is at nights, we would go outside of the house on the flat deck on the back of the house, not to watch the planes and thought how beautiful it was, but she felt safer outside the house than inside the house. And then it was very tough, and then we got liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. And it made such an impression on me that I always knew I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And, but we saw far too much that we should not have seen during the war. It was very difficult in the area that we lived, and grew up in particular with the hunger winter of 1944, 1945. There was no more food. The Germans had cut off all the food that came to that direction. A lot of kids, especially vulnerable ones, and then older people died because of lack of food. And then it was the coldest winter on record, so I still even remember now still the feeling of hunger and the feeling of cold, because all we had is a little stove in the house and only one little room where we would sit around. And then with my brother, my sister, every morning we would go into the railroad yards with gunny sacks and pick up anything edible or burnable. And the reason that we did as kids is because the Germans would kick us, not shoot us, and then we just came back the following day. And then when the liberation took place, it got pretty rough, and saw far too many things that we should not have seen, and and so that always kind of affected me with PTSD. The other part that affected me was the inner child, the fear of losing that parent. Yeah. Got counseling for that actually well into my 50s. Very, very emotional. And then I went to school. I was not very successful academically. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And then they said, what are we going to do with this guy? So should we send him to the mentally challenged school, or should we try to get him a career or a job and as a laborer? So they sent me to the furniture maker store factory, and I became a furniture maker. And and I always liked lumber, and my dad was in the lumber industry before and after he was in the war, and so I liked that. But then kids are hard on each other. All of a sudden, the kids that I went to school with, now all of a sudden I became a laborer. I'm very proud of it now, but I wasn't then, although I liked what I was doing. And, and then I developed the dream of going to, I felt that I had failed in a way, although I was a very happy-go-lucky individual. And, but I kind of felt I had failed, and so that always kind of was with me. So and then the other part, I had the dream of going to Canada. So I tried to go when I was 17, and my parents wouldn't let me then. And then I was drafted in the Dutch Air Force for 30 months or more than 2 years. And then I started working in the forest industry, already started building a career, but then I wanted still to go to the land of my heroes. And then I wanted to prove to me that I could do just as well as the other guys that used to go to the college and university. And so I wanted to start with nothing and then go to Canada. And the other dream that I had is build my own lumber mill. And so I left Holland when I was 23 with one suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I took $150. And I knew I only would go back if I either in a box or successful. I was committed and I was going to succeed. So when I came to Canada in July of 1965 in Montreal, I landed, came with the train across Canada, came to Vancouver. Could speak English, didn't have a job, didn't know a soul, and went to the immigration office. Fortunately, there was a German fellow there, and I could speak some German, so I told them what I wanted to do is I wanted to build a lumber mill, and you can relate to that because you're so familiar with BC. So the guy said to me, Prince George, that's where you have to go. That's a boom town, that's where the opportunities are. So I went in the Greyhound bus for 13, 14 hours, and then came off the bus in Prince George, about 3 blocks from where we are sitting now.
Wow.
That way. and so with my suitcase, my 2 sets of clothes, and the 3 bucks. And I had in my pocket, I counted at least 3 times, I had exactly $25.47. But what I had plenty of is attitude. I'm always a believer in no matter how difficult it is today, I believe it's going to be better tomorrow. And I always had that. That's with me. I had the passion. If I do something, I give it 120%, and I still do that every day and even still today. And work ethic, I work harder than anybody, even at 83. The passion is that even now, my employees gave that to me, actually. I usually get up at 5:30, and I always think I'm late. And then as I get up, I always make my bed, and then whatever the day brings, I give it all that I got, but I'm always an optimist. And so I started from nothing as a cleanup man, lumber pilot, and went through all the things, and then within a year and a half, I already was a superintendent of one of the largest lumber mills here in the Prince George region, and then within 2 years already was part owner of a sawmill. Of all places in the Yukon, in Watson Lake, the Yukon Territory. And for a guest watching us around the world, you will already know that the Yukon Territory is right next to Alaska. It is about 1,000 miles north of Vancouver. And, and I always say in the Watson Lake, it snows in July, so you don't know if it is late or early. And, it's one of those places. Anyway, so I was there for a number of years, and then already became an entrepreneur there, bought a number of properties, and then came back to Prince George, and then started working on my own lumber mills here, and and gradually in 1975, nearly 50 years ago now, started my first lumber mill. Today I have 3 lumber mills, a number of other companies, 3 silos actually. The one silo is lumber, the other silo is warehousing, logistics, and the other one is real estate, both residential, commercial, and industrial. But even then, Sandy, to put it in perspective, I had the number of issues that you can relate to. Is I was not very good at interacting with people, and so a couple of things happened. Is that I could interact with them around my operations, 3 or 4, and then one day, my ex-sister-in-law, actually, she said, I'm going to bring you to Toastmasters. And I said, well, what is that? And she said, Toastmasters. I said, what exactly do they do there? Because if they're going to ask me any questions, I'm not going. She said, no, no, no. You just sit down and you watch what they're doing, and and what they're specializing in is obviously the way it looked from the outside. Is they teaching people to become better speakers and all those other things related to it. I didn't know exactly what it was, but anyway, I came to Toastmasters and I sat in the middle there, and they were doing all this stuff, and all of a sudden somebody stood up and say, "Hey, John, tell us about you." And I said, "Oh my God, I'll never go back here." But I stayed there for 10 years. And I went through all the levels. I'm a distinguished Toastmaster. It changed my life, actually. It did. And then the other part that, so that became part of the foundation. The other part that changed my life is that in 1997, so I was in Toastmasters from 1990 to 2000, and then in 1997, I still have the book. I walked into a store here, and I picked up a book, and it said, Driven to Distraction. I don't know why I opened the book. I still don't know why. And as I looked in it, it said ADHD. And it was January of 1997. And the book was written by Dr. Halliwell. Actually, I'm podcasting him next week, I think. Can you believe it? So anyway, it was a book about ADHD, and I wrote in the book in Dutch because I was ashamed of it. Is now I finally know who I am. So by then, I already was 57 years old. And so the more I learned about ADHD looking at Google, because and it took me 5 years before I would go to my doc here that had delivered our two daughters and also was a personal friend. And I went into his office when I was 62 then, and he said, "Hey, John, why are you here?" I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked it out, and he said, "Yeah, you do, So that's kind of the story. What has happened since makes me a late bloomer, I guess. I was very successful in business. Obviously I became a good speaker and do a lot of public speaking now and keynotes and all the other kind of things. And then I'm an author. So about 5 years ago, somebody said to me, or already 20 years ago, somebody said, you have such an interesting life. Why don't you write a book about it? And I tried to do that. I stopped. Writing books, as you know, is not easy. So I stopped, I started, and then finally I thought 5 years ago, I said, if I don't do it now, it won't happen. So I did. I wrote a book about an autobiography, and it's Against All Odds. And it took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And it's not about how successful John is. No, it's about all the ups and downs and all the challenges within being very popular. I will send you a copy of it. And so I did that. And then the more I thought about it, and then the more I started to learn about ADHD, the more I started including it in my presentations. And then I felt I have to write about it. And I did. I wrote a book about it, ADHD Unlocked. And as written by the ADHD mind, that means you can start it anywhere, you can go forward or backwards, wherever you want to go. It works, very popular. And then the other one, I just wanted to show you this. And so there are so many people that do not like their jobs Or there are so many people, young people in particular that I talk to, I say, what you going to do for a career? And say, I don't know. Well, then what are you going to do about that? How do you decide on what career you're going to have? Because, that all the things you do from here on in will have an effect on the rest of your life. And so the more you learn, talk to entrepreneurs or talk to people. You want to be a welder, talk to somebody that is welding. You want to be a furniture maker, talk to somebody who makes furniture. Or you want to be an entrepreneur, talk to entrepreneurs. All of those people, in most cases, like to talk to people about what they do. And so I say it's very important. The other thing that I saw on CNN or someplace is that, that 70% of the people that work in the United States don't like the job. And then 75% of the 70% are looking for another job. And so I wrote this book, came out last July, actually, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream. And then say the appropriate question would be, okay, John, are you living your dream? I say, I absolutely am. And I've always done through all the ups and downs. And then I'm writing one more book that I have to just tell you, and then I'll let you kind of react to it, is that I believe it is very important to stay, everybody gets a scare, right, at life, and that's saying, okay, I'm going to have to change direction. And, so I was one of those individuals over my life that I was not the most healthiest. And then every time around this time of year, after New Year, I make that commitment. I'm going to go to the gym, and then 2 weeks later, all of a sudden I can't find 100 reasons as why I can't go. So in 2008, I had a case of diverticulitis. Diverticulitis is, you're familiar with, nearly killed me actually, and I came that close. And from there on in, I knew I had to do something about it, and I started hiring a trainer and go to the gym. For me, it's important. I live by appointments and then have the schedules, and then automatically I go. So I started training for about 7 years. And then somebody said to me, have you ever thought about competing? Now, by then, already I'm in my late 60s, 70s. And I said, me? And I started to think, maybe I should, gives me a goal. And I started training, and then in 2017, 2018, I competed here in northern BC, bodybuilding and physique. Came in second in bodybuilding, third in physique. That allowed me to compete provincially. Came in third in physique, second in bodybuilding. That allowed me to compete nationally in the Arnolds. And then COVID came, and now I'm training again to start competing again this year on 2024, and then hopefully in 2025 go again to the Arnolds. By then, I'm 84, 85. That makes me the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. I love it.
Wow.
So there you go. Some of my background.
My hat off to you, sir. Firstly, thank you for sharing your story with me, and I really want to celebrate you. I think that your story is, well, firstly, I acknowledge that you suffered trauma that most people can't even imagine. And somehow, even with that trauma, and on top of that, having ADHD, you turned your pain into power. And a lot of things you said resonated with me, including that sometimes those of us with ADHD, regardless how smart we are, we don't do well in academia. We don't do well in that. I actually dropped out of college. I struggled. It didn't matter how brilliant I had been labeled. I did not thrive in that school environment. So I, like you, just kept a positive attitude and just climbed my way up through everything I did on my own, through hard work, and good intentions and a positive attitude, no matter how hard things got. So I honor that about you. And I just think your story is fascinating. I'm glad you wrote books. It's inspired me. People have been telling me for more than a decade, you need to write a book. You need to write a book.
Yeah.
But my executive function, sometimes I'm just like, I wouldn't know where to start, or I would just brain dump it all and I wouldn't know how to organize it. But you've inspired me. I think that, like I said, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and people that would be considered high performers. And I think some of them, when they come to work with me, have recently received a diagnosis later in life of ADHD. And some of them, within a few sessions, I'm like, if I might make a suggestion, perhaps you could go to your family doctor and maybe, try to find those answers. Because when we understand ADHD and we understand how our brain works, I find it very empowering, because when we don't know why we are the way we are, I find, at least in my experience, we just make up assumptions of why we are that way. And they're usually not as helpful as just understanding, oh, this is how I work. This is what my rule set is. And in many ways, this is your superpower. It is my superpower.
No question about that, Sandy. And what I'm saying about this is that in ADHD Unlocked is that I felt I had to talk about it more and write about it. And now that is virtually not a day that goes by where I not encounter somebody that said, I never knew this, but I am, or my family member is, or somebody. And so what I'm saying is this ADHD Unlocked, or the other books, there's lots of books about it, including the ones that I refer to from Dr. Halliwell, that also people that are affected by trauma or because of it are affected by slow learning or not being used to this traditional learning cycle that we have, it is important for them. And also for the public at large is that it was thought initially when I started looking at it that about 8% of the population are affected by ADHD. I believe, and so do many others now, that it is well over 20%. And that the other part about it is that I suggest to people to read about ADHD because you will encounter them in your family and your friends or your workplace or in the world. And they tend to be a little different. Not bad, but in a good way. And that way you understand them better. And as you said, I've said always that it's a superpower. That's what it is. And that's how I present it. And if people say to me, well, I don't know how you do all this stuff, well, I say it's ADHD. I can do all that stuff, And so the one more book that I should mention to you, I was starting to tell you, and I forgot to mention it. The one that I'm writing now that comes out next July is Living Young, Dying Old. And it's about healthy living and then staying physically and mentally and healthy in a healthy diet are extremely important, and and are the base and the for all the things that you do, and and so and that book, Living Young, Dying Old, is not about age, the number, but the quality of life that you have.
I love that, and I couldn't agree with you more. And it's something that, well, a couple of things you said sort of piqued my interest, especially. And the correlation between trauma and ADHD, and even if we put aside somebody that experienced unimaginable, like extreme trauma that you clearly did, even an average, whatever that is, an average child growing up with ADHD is said in ADHD magazine. I read an article that says a usual child with ADHD receives up to 20,000 pieces more of negative feedback by the age of 12 than a neurotypical child, because we're constantly compared to what we're supposed to be, which increases shame, which increases the sort of maladaptive coping mechanisms, which causes things like overeating or addiction, or ways that when we don't know what it is that's unique about our brains, we don't really know how to fuel it properly. I often tell neurodivergent or ADHDers, you're like a Ferrari or a Porsche. You are amazing. You are fast. You can go. You are like one of the greatest cars on the road. But I had a Porsche. I did not put 84 octane or 87 octane fuel in that vehicle. Even though we as ADHDers tend to be a little more craving, have a proclivity to want to sort of medicate our emotions, our huge emotions, and our brain chemistry, our dopamine through food. For me, over any ADHD medication I ever tried, changing my food behavior and keeping myself at optimum health was more helpful than absolutely anything else I tried combined. Exactly. Even though it was a little difficult for me to change my eating behaviors at some points, but I agree with you on that. And so when we're fueling these vehicles really well, and we've got these supercomputer brains, something else I read is that because our brains are processing so much information in parallel at the same time, glucose, preferably in the form of fresh fruit rather than processed sugar, is sort of like the engine coolant. So we might need 4 to 5 times the amount of glucose as a neurotypical person because our brain is just going. So I always have like a fruit smoothie with me when I'm doing something that requires my presence and my thinking. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I like that. I'm very fortunate. My wife is she is vegan, and and I'm kind of 80-20. And now the other thing that you may find interesting is that we have a place in North Saanich in Victoria.
Nice.
Yeah, so and both my wife and myself we have horses. We ride dressage. So, and we have a farm there, and it's a beautiful area, as you well know. And and so I'm there for the weekends, and then I'm here during the week. When I'm there, I do all her shopping, which is somewhat amazing. So she knows, I know exactly what she wants, and I eat pretty much the same. So making sure that diet is critical. And then staying physically healthy, not necessarily doing what I do. You don't have to go become a bodybuilder or doing, as long have at least 20 minutes to half an hour activity every day. At least that's all it would take for somebody to stay physically healthy and then go further if you wish, but it is so critical, that I know so many people that are in the late 40s, maybe early 50s, and they say, well, I can't do anything anymore, so I just kind of, I'm too old for this and too old for that. And I said, no, that is so much more quality of life available to you, and you just, this beautiful body that we've been given by nature, it will take a certain amount of abuse, but it only goes so far, and then it will not allow it any longer. And if you're careful, then, and especially treasure it for what it is, then there is no reason for us. I say I'm going to live till I'm 120.
I love that. I think if there's anybody that can do it, I have no doubt that you'll do anything you put your mind to. And yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it can be harder for people with ADHD sometimes to get started with those habits. So I always remind them that it's just keep the end goal in mind and just keep putting one foot in front of the other. I used to be very unhealthy. I was very addicted to food. I drank too much. I had a lot of PTSD and trauma that I avoided really looking at. And I know how challenging it can be for ADHDers to make new habits, but I guarantee it is possible. And just taking that little step after little step and using a lot of self-compassion and not beating yourself up when you fail, but just taking those micro changes over time. If if you just make a conscious choice to do it differently over and over and over, eventually that becomes your new subconscious baseline. And then it's eventually somewhat effortless, at least for me.
So
But
in
sometimes
your
hard to get started.
yeah, you had a challenging period too in your life until you. So what happened to when did you first discover that you had Asperger and then ADHD?
Um, I was in my mid 30s. And
Already,
I'd had a
right?
couple of successful careers where I was self-made and just sort of like was able, like you just to push
Right,
myself and
right.
sort of do everything with excellence. But I noticed that for me at that time, no matter what I did, I never felt fulfilled.
Yeah.
And I knew that something was missing and I didn't know what it was. And then I had a bunch of really unfortunate health crises. And I think I've just always had this desire to not suffer. And I just always found that being a victim or suffering and struggling just wasn't very much fun. And I think I'm sort of intrinsically incentivized to create a life that really feels fun while I'm here. So I think it sometimes took the sort of that pain to sort of motivate me to figure things out. And once I found out about ADHD, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. And it sort of like sparked this like excitement, this renewal for like, okay, it's not that I'm bad or lazy or wrong or stupid or crazy or unlovable. I remember deciding at one point, the reason I act strange or that people think I'm different, it must just be that I'm unlovable. Like I remember making these weird conclusions about why I was different. And then, like I said, because I wasn't always maintaining and properly doing the proper maintenance on my nice, super fast vehicle, I wasn't putting premium high octane fuel in it. I had health crashes. And I think those are what motivated me to just figure something else out and just learning about neurodivergence and hyper focusing my mind on learning about ADHD excited and empowered me. And I thought,
So
how many other people must be struggling and they don't know why?
So, what triggered you? How did you realize? Did you get diagnosed or did you read about it? How
Mm,
did you? There must have been something like for me, I had no idea until January 1997. So now I'm 57 years old, kind of felt I had been a failure. And
yeah.
although I didn't feel that inside of me, I was going to prove to me that I could do it starting from nothing. That's why I came here with nothing. And
You
then,
did.
yeah, but it's a bit of the hard way, but I'm trying to do now to the best that I can, that the younger people are and discover that they are blessed. It's not a liability, that they have a touch of the superpower, and that gives them the ability to go wherever they want to go, whatever that may be. The better. If it happens when you're 57, or by the time I got my official diagnosis, now I'm 62. So that's when everything changed for me. I was quite successful in business, had been for many, many times, but and then Toastmasters to a certain extent, by coincidence,
Mm,
changed my life. And then the other
mm,
part, obviously picking up the book from Dr. Halliwell about ADHD,
yeah.
and then everything changed.
Yeah. And I think it's great that you and myself and others like us just speak openly about it, because I don't believe in regret or looking back and wishing things were different, because it's not helpful. But I do think that it is helpful to maybe catch people younger so that they can skip through some of the suffering and struggle with relationships and not understanding why they're different. I think that the younger we sort of catch people and empower them with that information and teach them how to drive a Ferrari. And I think and just sort of change some of the social stigmas around what people think that ADD or ADHD looks like.
Yeah. And so I feel I have an obligation about that. And the other unfortunate part is that, having gone through what you went through and what I went through, that a lot of people would maybe not have the ability to push through it. I did. And if I can somehow show that there are other ways of, it's not a liability, and it's a superpower. In fact, you can do with it what you want, and even
when
now,
you understand the rule, or when you understand how, because I do think it's also valid that some people, it currently feels like a liability, and that's valid. But again, it's because nobody's given them the owner's manual on how to drive that Ferrari yet.
Exactly. And then the other amazing part about it is, as you already alluded to, and obviously, is that I believe among entrepreneurs and successful people, including the Elon Musk, are being very, very successful in all the things that they do. And I believe that likely where 20% of the general population is affected by ADHD, I would suggest that probably close to 50% of the successful entrepreneurs have a touch of it or a combination of it. I believe.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you too.
Especially the successful ones.
Our out of the box thinking and creative thinking and problem solving and ability to thrive under pressure and not like to do things by the rules make us glorious entrepreneurs, as long as we might also have the support that we require to compensate for some of our, if we want to call them deficits, or of our areas where we're not, our executive function challenges. Like for me, technology is a big barrier for me.
Yeah.
If I don't have the right support.
Yeah, and that's the key, if you don't have right support. So the other day we were looking for a senior executive in one of our companies, and I put in, advertised it with all the normal broader global or the BC and Western Canada newspapers, and I put in it that ADHD would be considered to be a benefit. So...
Thank you for doing that. I love that.
And that's exactly the case, right? For all the reasons that you know and that I know, is that a lot of the executives, and I've been on many boards, I'm involved in many, many companies, thinking outside of the box doesn't come natural to a lot of people. For an ADHD mind, it does, because they easily go in out of the area of the where they normally.
As long as they're in their genius zone, or as long as they're, we're, as you know, we have a reward-based nervous system. So if they're doing something that they find fulfilling, that we like, we can just jump in and hyper focus on it. And as long as we have support in the areas where we might need a little bit of support, then we can thrive. Companies like Google even seek out people with ADHD to hire, like you do.
Yeah, exactly. So just coming back to what you didn't do in your career, is you are coaching or consulting people that are executives in all kinds of different areas. And so how does that look, your business model?
I have some flexibility. I don't like to do everything a certain way. So I have a lot of flexibility, whether I'm doing personal coaching or corporate coaching. But again, a lot of the challenges that I've observed over the years is helping entrepreneurs or executives bridge that gap between achievement and fulfillment. And a lot of the really brilliant entrepreneurs and and whatever we consider successful, they often struggle with relationships, with understanding themselves, with emotional mastery, and those things can sort of prevent them from enjoying or having that most like fulfilling, or what I call magnetic life, where it's, just checking the boxes alone might not be enough. So helping them find what is that X factor that's going to help them feel fulfilled. Or I go into companies where they either suspect or know that the executives or whoever on the team has ADHD, and how to figure out how to help them thrive and how to help them heal from some of the assumptions or traumas that they experience from not understanding why they were a little bit different. And not all the men I work with have ADHD. It just sort of happens to be some sort of universe coincidence that a lot of the ones that I work with end up
Isn't it
just
amazing?
having ADHD. And I'm like, oh, don't worry. I hyper focus. That was my special interest for 6 years. So we
Yeah.
got you. But
Yeah.
not all of them are neurodivergent. It just happens to be that a high percentage of them are. And I do work with some women, but just a lot of who I work with are high performing men.
Yeah, I was looking at, so I looked at Google. I got your bio, obviously, and then I looked at Asperger syndrome. I thought I want to know a little bit more about that, so I went to Google and I printed it off, a comprehensive guide to its 10 symptoms.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, this one here, and the
Okay.
symptoms are underdeveloped social skills,
Yeah.
difficulty with nonverbal behavior,
Yep.
and trouble expressing emotions.
That part is partially true. And a lot of the studies on Asperger's have been done on boys. And if you look at, and again, I accept anybody anywhere on any gender spectrum is completely valid. But if we looked at a more binary model of boys and girls, if you look at neurotypical boys and girls tend to have different skill sets. So in neurodivergence in females, a lot of the research is done on men. So females, we may have trouble regulating our emotions, but we might be more skillful at expressing them than a little boy would be. Similar to how a neurodivergent or a neurotypical boy and girl would be different. So that one's partially, in my experience, partially yes.
Yeah, a lot of times it's men in particular expressing emotions regardless of Asperger's or ADHD. They have more difficulty with that. I don't personally. I don't think I do. So, but that's not untypical. And then the other part was lack of coordination. They said here, don't know exactly what that means. And then fixation on rituals and routines, limited range of interest. I'm not sure, so.
So again, the old terms of ADHD and Asperger's are somewhat a little bit archaic or unfashionable now. And especially in women, there's often a crossover between the two. So it's almost hard to say which is which, especially when you have ADHD on board as well. So a lack of range of interest can also be very similar to an ADHD type of brain, where we get focused on a topic and we want to talk about that topic. We're interested in that topic. It's sort of like hyper focus. So when I was into photography 100 million%, 16 hours a day. I was learning it. I was examining it. I was challenging myself. I was examining 500 photos a day to figure out how I could get better and better and better. So it's not that it's just sort of like, it's again, they would also use that as a symptom in ADHD of that hyper focus, or that I don't care about these other things that people are talking about. It's boring to me. I want to talk about this thing and this thing.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like that.
Yeah.
And that's,
yeah.
again, most of those symptoms nowadays, it's almost hard to separate the two.
Yeah. No, I can see that, so one of the things with ADHD is hyperfocusing or
Yeah,
finding something that is of interest and
yeah,
then they become very, like when I was going to school, I've always been a good writer and
right.
and I've been good at numbers, but the structure in school, if I would be sitting in school, I'd be sitting there the whole day. And if they ask me afterwards, what did you do today? I haven't got a clue because I was elsewhere. I was not
Me
there.
too.
And so, on the other hand, if I do something that I like, same as you, then I give it 150%, and I love it, and that's what I do with the things that I like, and I'm good at it, so.
And then it regulates or helps us get dopamine. But if we're not getting dopamine from an activity, it can be almost impossible to do it. So that can appear to other people like laziness or disinterestedness. But if we were really, really, really oversimplifying neuroscience for the sake of metaphorical alignment, if we don't, between thinking a thought like, I'm going to pick this up and go clean it, or whatever it is, between
Right.
thinking that thought and completing that action, we need dopamine and probably a zillion other brain chemicals that I have no awareness of. And if we're not interested, we don't get that little rush, then it can feel almost paralyzing or impossible to pay attention, to focus. And it's
Exactly.
not that we don't care. It's not that we don't want to. It's not that we're lazy. It's not that we're disinterested.
Yeah.
I guess it's a little bit that we're disinterested actually. But
So
it's just that we're not, our brain chemistry is not giving us that go do that thing unless it's
no.
exciting for us.
I love it that I'm ADHD and I'm very vocal about it, obviously, and I believe it's a superpower and I use it
Yes.
a lot of times. And, so what I found is that, uh, that because of technology and all the things that are happening right now, people are not interacting as much as they used to do. Is we all have dinner together, or as friends we get together and sit around the table, and the typical community things. I don't see that here much, and I don't do much of it either myself. But what I've discovered, obviously, is that I love podcasting because it gives us the ability to interact with somebody that is in North Carolina or
Yeah.
and sitting in central British Columbia, and we become friends in our discussion. We are interacting
Yeah.
on topics that we have in common in a lot of areas. And at the same time, what is so unique about podcasting, that there are, I believe, thousands of people around that will become party to that conversation. And it has opened up a whole new world of interacting in discussing in a much broader group. And I think it is still at the very beginning of becoming much, much broader, much, much further
Yeah.
as we go forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I'm brand new to it. But I find it very exciting because that's something I never have trouble doing, is sitting and having an open, vulnerable, authentic conversation with somebody. If I could get paid to do that for the rest of my life, I would. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like, I think it's
that's the
so much
part
fun. And
that,
I think that connection is important.
yeah, that's the part that I like about it. And then in our case in particular, that is, if it were not for Toastmasters and some of the other things that I did, I could not have done this. I could not have become a speaker. I could not have become an active podcaster. And so it has opened the door. And then the other one is that, becoming an author. And I will sign the books for you and I will send them to you. Scott will
Thank
get your
you.
address. And,
Thank you.
anything else that comes to mind, Sandy? It's been an extremely interesting conversation between you and me, and
Yeah, nothing comes to mind right now. I could literally talk about this for the next 6 months with you. I find it fascinating. I enjoy this, but I also know that my assistant says I'm like taking a sip from a fire hose when I'm excited about a topic. So,
I do too. So, Sandy, it was a privilege and a pleasure to have you on my podcast. And let's
yeah,
make sure we
anytime.
stay in
Thank you.
touch. The
Yes,
other
I'd
thing
love
that
that.
we do is we put out our podcast very quickly. There is very little editing that we do on it. It will come out as we do, and you should see it probably by tomorrow morning, Andrew. By tomorrow morning, we'll have it
Wow,
out, and then I'll sign the
cool.
books and we'll send them off to you. And then let's make
Thank
sure we
you.
stay in touch.
Yeah, I would really love that. Thank you. I would love to hear more about you. I could just ask you questions all night.
Let's make sure we stay in touch.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thanks,
Thank
Sandy.
you.
Take
I
care.
appreciate this so much.
Yeah, take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.